My name is David Smith, and I'll be your host for today's session. But before we get started, some virtual housekeeping items I'd like to step through. First, to better understand who is participating in our safety connections and ensure we are providing accessible training for all people in Ontario, we would like to invite you to participate in a short survey. And the reason is we are collecting demographic information on behalf of our funder, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development, fondly known as MLITSD. And then your responses will be kept secure and anonymous. And the ministry will not receive any of your confidential information or personal information, rather. WSPS will be analyzing the survey results in an aggregate form prior to sending them to the ministry. Sorry, folks, just trying to, of course, completing the survey or answering any of the questions is optional. And to access the survey, you can click on the link in the chat that will be provided shortly. And on the screen, you can scan the QR code with your phone or electronic device. And also, too, we ask that you use that six-digit function number, the 227184. A few other things I'd like to step through as well. The audio for today's session is through your computer speakers. And that said, you may want to consider using a headset or earbuds for better sound quality. And to minimize the amount of distractions in the background, we have turned off all the participants' microphones and cameras. However, if you're like me, you want to ask questions and you ask them as you think of them, we ask that you use the chat feature. To access the chat feature, you simply go to the ribbon across and you look for the bubble with a couple lines in it. And then you can hit the chat feature and type in your questions. And also, too, if you want to type in any general comments, you may do so. But please keep in mind, the chat feature is a public platform. What you type in can be viewed by all the participants on today's calls. And also, too, we will have a few polling questions throughout today's session, and we're going to be bringing the polling questions across through the chat feature. Now, depending on your computer security system, you may not be able to answer the polling questions as you see them. If that's the case, we ask that you type in the answers in the chat feature. And we don't think the questions are that difficult for today. I think we're in pretty good mood when we created the questions. So just do your best to answer them. And if you don't get them right, it's all good. Don't worry. Two other accessibility features I want to step through. So you can turn on your live captions, and to access that, you go to the three dots or the more actions item menu. Scroll down to where it says language and speech, and then you can turn on live captions. And if you're like me, you like to view things in a full screen mode. To do so, you go to view, go down to where it says more options, and then you can click on the full screen mode. And to get out of full screen mode, you just do the exact same process, but you just hit exit full screen mode. Prior to the pandemic, we used to facilitate what we called network knowledge exchanges. And we used to host these in various locations throughout the province, and we used to host them in person. During the pandemic, we wanted to stay in touch with industry peers like yourself, and we found the best way to do so was to do it virtually. And then we came up with a concept of doing safety connections in a virtual platform. What we want to try to do is share information with folks like yourself. That said, we encourage you to learn what you can, take away what's of value to you and your colleagues, and share those with the people that you work with. And now it gives me pleasure to introduce a couple of folks with me today. We have a special guest, Mr. Adam Moffat. Adam is an industry expert with over 20 years of successful experience in end-of-life tire operation, retail tire, and tire industry association management. Adam began his career with Ontario Tire Recovery Incorporated, a successful family operation providing scrap tire removal and recycling services across Ontario. Under the direction of Adam and his father, Ontario Tire Recovery Incorporated quickly became Ontario's leading scrap tire removal company, developing several successful end-of-life programs for large retail chains. In 2009, Adam transitioned to Liberty Tire Recycling Canada during the sale of Ontario Tire Recovery Inc. as the Ontario General Manager of Operations, overseeing all hauling, recycling, and end-of-product development across Ontario. In 2019, Adam joined the Ontario Tire Dealers Association, also known as OTDA, as the executive director overlooking operations and growth of the association. In 2022, Adam took on a dual role, become the executive director of the Tire Dealers Association of Canada, also known as TDAC. In addition to his roles with the OTDA and TDAC, Adam actively participates with several industry organizations and boards, including the WSPS, Vehicle Sales and Service Advisory Committee, the Tire Industry Association Executives, and the RPRA Service Provider Advisory Council. Good morning, Adam, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, David. Thanks for having us, and everybody at WSPS. Looking forward to the third installment today, and we had a lot of great feedback from our members through the past installments. So I just wanted to bring that forward and let you guys know that we think this is well worth the investment and well worth the time. So thank you again for hosting us.
Great. Thank you for the kind words. And now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Mr. Aidan Robertson, who is a senior health and safety consultant with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services in Sudbury, Ontario, with experience in diverse industry sectors, including healthcare, emergency services, manufacturing, retail, and services. Aidan understands the need to creatively integrate health and safety principles into the work performed by workers in order to reduce injuries and improve safety, quality, and productivity. Good morning, Aidan, and welcome.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Adam.
Sorry, Aidan, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to ask you, what are we going to be talking about today?
Oh, no, I was just excited to get into it. No, so I'm excited for the third installment here. We've had some good, conversation before. We talked some important topics. Early on, we really focused on the training aspect. Hey, you're leading up to the season. You need to get people ready. Okay, we need to equip them with the right stuff, the right knowledge, skills to do this work that we need these temporary workers to do in this high pressure season. Second installment, we talked supervision. Obviously, you're going to expect certain things to be done certain ways for safety's sake. Okay, we need to supervise. We need to hold people accountable to those requirements. As I was kind of putting these sessions together, I was looking at this going, okay, does this make sense as the third installment in the session? And I promise I'll get your answer to Dave, what we're talking about today. And, does the idea of talking about worker rights and responsibilities logically fall here? And I think this is in some way a great conversation to have surrounding or further to all those topics we had about equipping people and supervising them, to come back to the fundamentals of what are the workers, these individuals who are actually doing this work that they're hired to do in this high pressure, short-term nature of this tire changeover season. What are their roles? We can talk all we want. We can set up all the the frameworks, the structures, the training, the supervision that we can. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there's still workers' roles to play in keeping themselves and their coworkers safe, healthy at work, and ultimately, supporting a thriving business, getting the work done that needs to be done in this high pressure season. So today, I really wanted to talk about what are the workers' roles, and respecting their roles within the IRS, and kind of flipping it on its head a little bit and talking about how it's important to respect that the system does involve everyone. One topic I want to talk today a bit about, and kind of on this topic of new, young, temporary workers, this idea of risk perception and a common problem that we see of underreporting. And then I want to cover off some key things to keep in mind, to reinforce, to empower your workers with, and that's reinforcing worker health and safety responsibilities, supporting their workers' rights, and these are two different things. These do relate to each other, but their intent is vastly different. So, and we're going to cover off a couple of some additional mandatory training requirements for workers. We did talk training first and foremost, but the training I want to talk about today is really in support of the workers' roles within the IRS. So again, why are we having this conversation? Well, we're squarely in the middle of the winter tire changeover season. I'm up in Sudbury, Ontario. I've had my winter tires on for some time now, but I know in other parts of the province it's ramping up. Probably in the thick of it at this point, experiencing this high time and workload pressure, maybe already getting into the situation of fatigue and stress, and people feeling like, whew, this is a lot that we got going on here. This is one thing I want to talk about today. Are you experiencing, are you seeing this issue where, because of the high time, because of the workload pressures, because of the fatigue, the stress, all these factors that we talk about, are you seeing errors? Are you seeing violations? Are you seeing mistakes? And these are different things. There's vastly different between someone choosing to do something different than the way they know they're supposed to versus, experiencing, I'm feeling the pressure, I got to get this done. Okay, just what's the shortest distance between A and B? Making a mistake, a slip, a lapse along the way, unconsciously, that may lead to an injury or incident happening. So again, we want to respect that we're talking about, these factors, this high workload pressure, high periods of stress for this period of this group of workers who, are hired on temporarily, are hired on seasonally, may or may not have experienced a season like this before, may not have done any form of work like this before, or even worked in Ontario before. So it's critical that we focus on this group. As we talked about, this group, new, young, temporary workers, are considered what we classify as vulnerable in the province of Ontario here. You might see that called different in different jurisdictions, but we classify this as vulnerable workers here. Reason why is that, as we've talked about before, we see this group of workers 4 times more likely to be injured during the first month at work relative to someone who's been there for some time. And we do see that the sales, service, and labor sectors show high lost time injury rates, LTI rates, with these workers. Again, these are sectors and with a broad types of work that are performed. And in terms of the services and labor, doing something for someone else, in a context of a business that it's highly specialized, in your case here, using vehicle lifts, using tire removal equipment, wheel balancers, grinders, pneumatic impact guns, all these tools and heavy industrial equipment that's involved with this service and labor sector. It's only one example of how there are some pretty significant risks and hazards in these types of workplaces. Some workplaces that may, be large and franchised, or small businesses, 2, 3, 5, 10 workers, doing the same types of work. So why? Any number of reasons, and we can cover off these, and we'll come back to these shortly. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but new and young workers, temporary workers, eager to impress. Hey, I only have so much time. I'm on contract for 3 months. I want to make sure I show them I'm valuable. Maybe that was a conversation I was had. Hey, if you do a good job here, then we can potentially extend you. Okay, well, I'm definitely eager to impress them. Some other factors here that we'll talk about. I'm going to speak to this briefly, or shortly here. Sorry. Low risk perception. If I don't see something as dangerous, I'm more likely to engage in a behavior that exposes me to the risk associated with that. Excuse me. Fear of speaking up. Again, I might be eager to impress because I'm only on staff for 3-4 months, but hey, that may also lend itself to, I don't want to, shorten that already short tenure here by speaking up. And maybe there's some cultural aspects associated with that. Maybe there's some knowledge aspects associated with that leads to people, just feeling like they're not allowed to speak up, or being fearful of speaking up to potentially supervisors, to management. One piece of it we're going to reinforce today is maybe it's just so simple as these workers, new, young, temporary, don't understand their rights and responsibilities here in the province of Ontario. And I think that's a really critical starting point. And one of the key things I wanted to focus on today is equipping workers with the appropriate their knowledge and understanding of their worker rights and responsibilities, so that they can feed inputs into your health and safety system. And this kind of comes to this concept of the internal responsibility system, which I think we've covered this off before. You've probably heard this in some way, shape, or form before, and for good reason. It's the foundational principle of our health and safety legislation, the Health and Safety Act here in the province of Ontario. You won't find this term in the Act or the regulations, but the entirety of all those complex, hard to understand legal clauses that have more commas in them than a sentence ever should. It's all built around this idea of shared responsibility in the workplace on behalf of employers, supervisors, and workers. And typically we view this from a top-down perspective. I've for years thought that we should view this side by side or in some cyclical or triangular hierarchy here, because I don't think this frames it adequately. And I think it leads us to think that, okay, it's the employers, it starts with them. They are responsible to create the safe work environment, establish the policy, establish the programs, set in place supervisors to monitor that work, hold people accountable, train workers, to do the job safely. And then workers, you follow the rules. You do the work that we tell you to do in the way that we tell you to do it for safety's sake. Well, I don't think that adequately tells the story, and I think it frames it from that top-down perspective in a way that doesn't really reinforce that workers have just as important a role to play as supervisors and employers. I would rather view this as a triangle. It's critical that workers, it's important to remember this IRS works in both directions, and that inputs go this way as well. Inputs go up this chain if we do want to view it this way. For any health and safety issues to get addressed in the workplace, for a supervisor to be aware of something that's not the way it should be, for an employer to be made aware that, hey, we need to change the way we do things around here because people are getting hurt, it has to start with the workers. Workers obviously need to comply and, follow the rules, do work in a way that's set up for their safety and with that in mind, but also to participate and ultimately bring forward any concerns to the attention of the company. In the interest of this as a cycle, the only way that it's going to continue is if workers continue to serve those inputs and provide that feedback to their supervisors and their employers. So yes, promoting and creating a safe work environment does translate downwards from employers to workers, but in the interest of that as a cycle, workers have to bring forward their concerns to the attention of the company. And ultimately, I've shown this slide in each session so far, and we've spoken to it in different ways. And we were talking very squarely here at the front end. You want people to be safe. Okay. The way these are the terms the Act requires. Hey, employers need to provide information, instruction, and supervision to keep workers safe. Okay. These are largely what we call latent factors. These are your system elements. This is the framework in which the employer and the employer is creating for the work to occur within. There may be gaps in that. And in order for any of these gaps to be identified, maybe that happens at the supervisor level. Like I said, this, applying and holding people accountable to this information and instruction falls squarely at this supervisor level. But ultimately, the most risky place is where the work is actually getting done, where people are making judgment calls. Hey, this is the equipment that's coming in front of me. This is the tool I'm about to go use. Well, is the situation I'm about to use it inconsistent with the normal use of it? Or is there something different that I need to be able to identify and adjust my approach accordingly? Maybe that requires some supervision. Maybe that, in order to be able to identify the difference, identify any form of risk, and make a change associated with that, it has to be identified at this worker level here. And we need to empower workers to be able to do that. Because if we rely upon a system that has gaps in it, and we rely upon supervision that isn't, adequately monitoring the work practices and holding people accountable to these structural elements, then these injuries and illnesses and fatalities are going to continue to slip through here. And it's still, I'm going to do a dad joke here, it's still the cheesiest model I've seen, but I think this is it literally called the Swiss cheese model for perfect reasons. I don't think there's a better way of describing this, is that no matter the systems you put in place, there's always differences and situational or contextual elements that may not, lend to a perfect system, to a perfectly reliable system, and people being safe in every situation of a given type of work. So we need to respect that there will be gaps, and again, in the interest of today's session, empower workers to be able to bring those and identify those, so that it doesn't, these risks don't get to the point of harming them. So one point there, we talked about the inputs into systems, and one of the key things there is workers reporting concerns. I'll show you the legal language shortly. It is a legal responsibility for workers to report concerns to their supervisor employer. So a question I have for you today, do your workers, to your knowledge, it's a yes or no, I didn't add any middle ground here, do you feel that they reliably report hazards, injuries, and other concerns in your workplace to you if you're a supervisor? If you're an employer, do you see, regular statistics about, okay, what types of incident reports do we have come in, whether that was hazard reports, near misses, or actual injuries that have happened? And we can use the chat box for this. Yes, no, and any other thoughts you may have to support those. If you're not sure, that's also a valid answer. I got a couple. Yeah, I got a yes in there. Good stuff. Sometimes. Okay. We think they do. We hope they do. Could certainly be more, I'm sure. Yeah, to Bonnie's point there. That's really what the general trend is. Not even in your sector, just as a whole. We vastly see that things are underreported. That point there, Lauren, good one. Sometimes on their own, but not much without prompting. And that's a problem. Hey, if I'm only going to report something if somebody sees, okay, then I'm doing it. It's fulfilling somebody else's obligation. It's not actually fulfilling that worker right or responsibility in my mind. So if you answered yes, I think this is an important soul searching question there. If you're confidently answering yes there, how do you know? And that's a valid question. If you review statistics at your joint health and safety committee, please let us know. Like, what sorts of strategies do you use to monitor your incident reporting, your hazard reporting, whatever that looks like? Any thoughts from the group there? This might be joint health and safety committee, type of health and safety representative, depending on the size of your business. But this is an important question to do some. I've been calling it soul searching lately, and I like organizational soul searching. If you're not confident that your workers are reporting things, well, why? First aid kit inventory, very good point there. Hey, if we see that getting used and that matches up with the first aid that's been provided, okay, we have a good sense of reporting. Yeah, the number of hazard reporting forms, ISOSA. Good. If you're seeing the numbers come in, okay, that's a good indication that the system is working to some degree. This is a still valid question now. How do you know? How do you know that everything that should be reported by a worker is? How do you know that everything that matters to be reported by a worker is being reported? Maybe, for example, if you required your workers to report any spills, any broken equipment. All right, Ushma, I like that there. QR codes for hazard reporting. Make it nice and simple for them. That's one of the key things we're going to talk about there, is the simplicity of it. Like we said, they're coming back to one of the Lauren's point there about if, that prompting is, hey, yeah, you got to fill out this 3-page form to submit a concern you had. Well, how realistic is that? That's a fair amount of administrative work. Realistically, if that takes a half an hour or even 20 minutes to fill out, how likely is somebody to actually report that? But what's more valuable is, I'd say less about the details you're getting with that initial reporting, but that initial report, because that can be followed up on it. There needs to be that entry point. So I love that idea of QR codes for hazard reporting. Make it nice and simple. Maybe that's simply, hey, QR code, did you see a hazard? Hey, yes. What's your name? We'll come to you for more information. Awesome. You've still got that input in the system. So this question here, we talked a little bit about those other factors there, but any other reasons why you think new or young temporary workers may be reluctant to report? In this case, we'll say injuries. So if they are actually hurt, why do you think they might be reluctant to report injuries in the course of their, temporary, time-limited, seasonal type of employment? Yeah, Lauren's point there, fear of punitive action, fear of losing job. Are these realistic fears? Yeah, they think they'll get in trouble. It's fear of reprisal. And I think it's so interesting because, they shouldn't be. Yeah, Anita's point there. They shouldn't be. We're going to talk about there's legal protections for workers. We see the numbers here. I appreciate that feedback there, Lauren. Fear of embarrassment. I'm going to come back to that in a second when we talk about young and new workers. Yeah, there's social aspects that, even if there's no realistic, hey, we would never judge somebody for getting injured in a workplace, frame that inwards. Hey, if you got injured and you're a young person, would you feel embarrassed? Yeah, that's still potential. We all, treat ourselves a little bit differently to some degree than we view, others. When I say that, it's, this situation we see with, and then I'll come back to this with low risk perception of this general idea of like, oh yeah, but it's me. That's fine. Yeah, that's the rules. That's what everybody should do. But it's me, and it's okay that I do this because I'm really good at taking risks, or I know how to protect myself. And it's maybe some of these factors that we're going to get into that lead to this. But we do see statistically that young new workers do not report injuries as reliably. This study here, 21% of these were mostly age 16 to 24 workers, few hundred of them that were surveyed, and 21% of them reported experiencing one or more lost time injuries. But 50% also reported failing, and we say failing, just not reporting to the employer for those factors that we talked about: fear of reprisal, fear of embarrassment, fear of losing their job. Unaware, and some other ones here, unaware of the need to report injuries. Oh, I didn't think that was I'm 15. Hey, if I get hurt at work, whoa, they care about that. Okay, if nobody's told you that that's really important, that's there's a whole system associated with that. Lack of awareness. Hey, I just didn't know I needed to report those injuries. Perceived low severity. Oh, the cut's not that bad is a very common one. It's not that bad. I'll put a Band-Aid on it. Well, if certain, even simple first aid, simple cuts in these environments where you're working with brake fluids and grime and dirt and grease and other chemicals, there can be some serious infections that fester, and so what starts as a fairly low severity injury can certainly become something more severe. So getting the appropriate care and cleaning that wound at the point of where it occurs is critical. Like you say there, the negative reactions of others, whether that's from embarrassment, maybe that's supervision, ambiguity about whether the injury was caused by work. Hey, I really hurt my shoulder doing this, but I'm an active young individual. I play hockey, I play ultimate frisbee, I dance, whatever it is. I mountain bike. Hey, did me handling these tires and wheels or lifting these things? Oh, well, yeah, that threw my shoulder out, or that threw my back out in that moment. But was that actually what injured me? Well, I was already tired. I had gone to the gym. We're talking about a group here where there may be other factors that injure their body or set them up for injury in the workplace. This ambiguity about, I don't know if that was caused at work, so I don't need to report that. That's a factor we need to grapple with. Self-identity, coming back to this point of embarrassment. Hey, if I report an injury, then I'm someone who got injured at work. Then I fit into that category. This stigma, for lack of a better term, and this is a common thing we see with, mental health. People, myself included. Okay, if I am diagnosed with something like an anxiety disorder, well, then that becomes part of my identity. But if I don't engage in that, if I don't report that, if I don't bring it up, then is it actually, I can make a case that it's not part of me. And the lack of understanding of long-term impacts. We're talking young workers here, new workers here who are entering into their careers potentially. So, the settings themselves up for long-term careers, and by not reporting certain things could result in some pretty substantial negative effects down the line. So again, one thing I encourage you all to do is to empower your workers to the best of your abilities to report injuries, report concerns to you as supervisors, to you as employers. A lot of this, to use some young people terminology here, is about the vibe you set up in the workplace. And some things that speak to that, this cultural aspect of the workplace that we talk about another way. Avoiding discussions of blame, investigating all incidents. Hey, yes, you were injured, somebody was injured, whether it was them or someone else. We want to know what happened. We don't know how to stop it from happening to someone else. An important thing that we recommend, avoiding incentives for no injury or no lost time streaks. Hey, if we have a clean season, any no injuries, then you're going to get this bonus, pizza party, or financial, whatever. We should avoid those sorts of things. The classic, hey, it's been X number of days since our last injury. That should be avoided. That gamifies the injury reporting system. And hey, if I don't report the injury I experienced, then it doesn't contribute to that statistic, even though that injury did happen and I'm experiencing some effects from it. Educating about illnesses that come on over time, again, with some of the chemicals, noise, vibration, some of these exposures to things in the workplace don't necessarily injure people in the moment. Sometimes this can take a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years for the effects to come up. All the more important to empower people and educate them about, hey, yes, don't take any shortcuts, or we're going to hold you accountable to not taking any shortcuts because of the potential long-term effects here. Even though we know it's not going to harm you in a moment, we can see that shorter distance from A to B by doing something without our appropriate PPE or taking some form of shortcut. But being aware of the long game, I like to say, is an important thing to reinforce. And like I've been talking about here, reinforce any reporting norms. If people see other people reporting things, and they know that they need to, if it's simple to, then they are more likely to engage in that system. Excuse me. I don't know if you can tell I'm a little stuffy here from either my 4-year-old or my 1-year-old. I can't tell which one and whose fault it is this time, but I should be avoiding discussions of blame from that exposure to myself. It was probably the 1-year-old though, let's be serious. So again, all that we're talking about here, I like to come back to the fundamentals again in the context of the act. I'm not going to belabor this point, but again, workers have the obligation, and it's legally expected of them to work in the way that their employer requires them to for safety's sake. Use or wear equipment, protective devices, or clothing required by the employer. The part I want to reinforce here, and the part to build those norms around, is to reinforce that it's a legal expectation that workers tell the employer or supervisor if something is missing, or if there's something that's in the act they're aware of that's not being followed, or ultimately, if nothing else, if there's a hazard, if they have the concern with something in the workplace and the work they're being asked to do, that it could have a negative effect on their health or safety. It is their legal obligation to report that to the employer. So beyond that, again, we have the expectation that no workers will not do things that in a manner that will harm themselves or others. So this is where we start to see this interplay between duties, responsibilities, and rights. You know what? You need to follow the rules. You also need to not break the rules. We're really saying the same thing there, but in a bit of a different fashion. So one of the key things to remember, this is one aspect of this population of vulnerable workers, is we're talking about young workers and new workers, and this population has what we call low risk perception. They don't see situations as potentially harmful to themselves as they may realistically be. And I think society would view that as a negative. This has been, this has led to things like helicopter parenting and, preventing young people from being exposed to any risks. And we're seeing negative effects from that. It's important to remember that, these young brains are designed for risk. And when we say young, I'm still talking people young as, the working population of 16 to 24 years of age. Those are still young people, and brains are still developing. And in the interest of, learning our own limits and how to play within them, I'm going to rob the OLG's moniker there. Our brains are designed for that at that age. They need to be. They're adaptive. They need to be able to approach uncertain situations and determine, hey, can I anticipate the outcome if I take a certain action? Did I gauge something wrong? Okay, where do I need to adjust? They're designed for risk. They need to be to develop skills, to develop independence, to learn from mistakes, to try new things. We've all tried something for the first time, and we all still will continue to. It's important to remember that this isn't a fault of young people, is what I'm trying to say. There's a first time for everything, for everyone. And these individuals in this stage of life are discovering their physical capabilities, their talents, their skills, their interests. And so we need to be aware of that and consider it in the context of how we equip them and how we support them in the workplace. Because there's so many inputs into this. This is a bit of a mind map here of the various inputs into, if I'm an individual, if I'm a young person, this is where we are in the middle here. Well, what are factors that feed into my risk taking? So a couple that are important to consider in your roles as employers of these young people. The supervisors, the huge influence on young people's risk taking. These are people who are likely older. Maybe this person's first manager or mentor, or even first opportunity to look up to someone, or quote unquote, try to make someone proud or meet someone else's expectations other than their parents. So they're a huge influence on whether this individual is going to lower their risk-taking orientation or potentially raise it. In the context here, we're talking about, supervisor influence and how powerful it can be to lower risk orientation, and how that can actually overtake, if I see my coworkers, they are exhibiting risk-taking behaviors. Okay, do I want to ostracize myself by, being the person who says, no, that's not how we're supposed to do it? Or do I want to just quietly do things the way that they're doing it to be part of that group? And then parents as well. Again, one of the strongest influences, potentially some of the only influences on these young individuals' lives up until this workplace. So the risk perception that they've imparted on their kids is huge influence. So again, what the research supports here is that coworker influence is strongest on individual risk orientation. So again, these team dynamics are hugely important. Think about a sports team of young people. They create a culture among themselves, and that is extremely powerful. Young workers look to their coworkers to determine, okay, yeah, there's the system elements, there's the, but how do we actually work here? Okay, if you create that culture so that the way that you actually work here is the way that you're supposed to work for safety's sake, to avoid all, create a culture where that embarrassment isn't in a place, then I'm not saying it's easy, but if you can manage or at least steer in that direction, then okay, the unwritten rules can become just the rules. Maybe also people have good ideas that we can consider and build the rules around. Maybe there's just better ways of working that young people see. Again, given their adaptability and flexibility and the way their brains are wired at this stage of life. So again, this idea of workplace culture, what happens when the supervisor isn't looking versus what's really happening in the workplace. Again, this example, I don't know if I shared this last time, I might have been talking to a separate group, but this idea of, one of the, you go to a grocery store parking lot and, you're either the type of person who returns the cart to the cart return and puts it back in line with the others, or you're the type of person who leaves it at the entry point or just leaves it beside your car. Because ultimately there's no one holding us accountable to that, unwritten rule that, hey, we should, support each other. Somebody's going to have to go get those carts. The least I can do is put it back. And I've been jokingly sharing this as an example. Like, I mean, the ideal culture is that we all just do what we're supposed to do because we all, unconsciously hold ourselves accountable to it. You see someone, nobody ever speaks to, hey, you can't just leave that cart there at your instant. You got to return it. No, nobody ever does that, but it's we want to create this culture so that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing just because that's the way that we work. And again, this peer influence is huge really, with regards to this. This study here focused on driving behaviors, and again, the results show here that risk-taking behaviors will be greater amongst peers than with individuals who would be this is as we age, how our risk-taking behavior diminishes when we're with our peers. So as we're a young person here, this is why car insurances are so much higher for young people. Their risk-taking behaviors are higher when they're driving with their peers relative to, hey, if I hop into a car with my, a couple of my adult friends, it's not like I'm going to drive around with in a way that's risky to try and impress them. It seems silly to say at this stage of life, but that is a perspective we see younger people having, and this spills over into the workplace. Absolutely. So with that in mind, what would you say are some common risky, quote unquote, behaviors that you see amongst young workers in the context of tire shops, like we're speaking to today? Any examples? Because if you are in a position of, and if there are none, then that's good. Let's keep that good train rolling. Then the culture you're creating is working, change nothing. But if you're in that supervisor position, if you're an employer and, you can answer this question, even if, okay, so we're getting some answers coming in here. Yeah, if you not wearing PPE, common across the board. Hey, and okay, why? It's a valid question to ask. Lauren, your point there, not small, not properly tying work boots. That's a tripping hazard that's walking with you. That's only a higher likelihood than something that's on the floor in my way one time. This is gonna, that's playing the odds there about, is that gonna get caught under me, get caught around something? Yeah, not wearing PPE. And that's a huge one. If we come back to, core legal requirements, hey, employer's gonna set an expectation for PPE. If we skip to the workers, okay, it's your expectation to wear it if it's there for a reason. And then in that supervisor role, there is a bit of a mediator. I would say, okay, how do those, how is that getting addressed is an important question. Again, maybe there are, and this speaks to what I'll talk to here shortly about the rights of workers and rights of participating. Well, If they're not wearing or using their PPE, well, why? If it's not comfortable, okay, let's explore options there. That gives us a sense of direction, but that has to start with that why. Hey, you know, I can't fit into where I'm working when I'm wearing this hard hat, or my feet really hurt when I'm wearing these boots. Okay, these are, we can have a sense of direction to address these behaviors, but we have to start by asking that question about the why. Why are we seeing the risky behaviors that we're observing? And this comes back to that discretionary culture, discretionary behavior that we talked about. I think either last session or the session before, or maybe both. But like we said, this you know, where you see these unsafe work behaviors, the more that you allow these risky behaviors to continue happening, the more they get reinforced. Just picture, you know, the Grand Canyon is only as large as it is because that drip kept dripping. And it gets harder to backtrack from there. You know, it's much harder to address, you know, to put a stop to, hey, I've seen you not wearing your safety glasses, or not wearing your gloves, your hard hat, or your shoes for the last 2 months, and now I'm going to say something about it. Well, I had a better chance to correct that behavior 2 months ago when I first saw it. And again, this is where we start to tie in these rights of workers. Hey, if, you know, the right to know about job-related hazards fundamentally, if there's stuff in the work that workers are doing, they have a right to know about that. They should know about that. They should be aware. They should be able to recount back to you, oh yes, this is the risks involved with this type of work, and this is how I you know, perform this work to prevent harm to myself, how to control risk from these hazards. Within that, okay, if there's questions here, involve the workers, exercise their right to participate. The classic way we say here, one of the fundamental ways this was built into the Act, was the right to participate in the Joint Health and Safety Committee, to have a say, to provide recommendations to the employer. There are plenty of ways workers can participate beyond that, and I encourage you to get creative. Involve workers in the part of setting up how work is performed. Involve experienced workers in the training process, you know, in the process of recognizing, assessing, and controlling hazards to a reasonable degree. If you want to, you know, affect the culture, involve the people that are actually doing the work. This is, the more they participate, the less likely you run into that scenario where, hey, yes, this is the scenario, this is how work is supposed to be done on paper over here, and this is how the workers actually do the work, these unwritten rules over here. Well, if us over here have a say in how that system is created, we're going to bring ourselves closer to the middle. When they don't, then we're only going to drive a rift further between. And then this right to refuse unsafe work. And again, I think this comes back to some of the right to know about job-related hazards as well, and I think is critical for workers. I'll talk to some best practices around this in a few minutes here, but you know, this is an important right, and I encourage you to not minimize it, and empower workers here that, hey, if they have any reason to believe that something they're asked to do, or something they're about to do in the way they're about to do it could hurt them, to stop and to talk about it with a supervisor. I don't ever think, and I think I've said this before, that something should ever get to a work refusal if that internal responsibility system is working properly. If a worker raise a concern, my supervisor should say, hey, okay, good catch. Let's figure this out. Okay, what do we have to do so that you can work safely to reduce or eliminate that concern? That's all it should be. Okay, we need to make a change in the work because some concern has been raised. Perfect. Everybody's played their role. I, as a worker, reported a concern. It's been dealt with because they care about me. Right. I know I'm talking simplistically here. This is the way the system's set up. This right to refuse unsafe work should only be exercised, and really should only be only actively and is appropriate for use when there's that situation of, hey, I'm a worker, I've reported something to Adam or Dave, my supervisor, and they said, yeah, I hear you, get back to work, do that work the way that we're asking you to do it before you raise your concern. Yes, we hear you, but we're still asking you to do it that way. No, if I have a reason, if I believe that work is going to hurt myself or others for whatever reason, I have the right to say, no, I'm not going to do that until we figure this out. That's really what this right to refuse unsafe work is. Hey, I've got a feeling this is going to hurt me or someone else, and I'd like us to review this work to make sure that it's not going to. Okay, maybe it was going to. Maybe there's a good catch there. Maybe we really do change something, or maybe, like I've said before, maybe it's just, okay, can we run through how this work is to be done one more time before I actually do it? that might be all it takes. But again, we need to respect that that is a worker's right. And that could be related to any of this non-exhaustive list of hazards in the workplace, because there are plenty of hazards that workers can be exposed to. And if they have concerns about, the potential effects to their health or safety from these, then they have a right to figure out, okay, is that actually a risk to me? And ultimately, is there something different that needs to be done in the workplace so that I as a worker can work safely? And it's because you're not exempt from really any category of hazards. You have equipment and tools and safety hazards, large, heavy industrial equipment, lifting vehicles up, going under them, pulling off heavy parts, using intense, vibrating, serious, heavy equipment, using chemicals in the workplace, dealing with people, working amongst physical agents, working in the environment amongst safety related concerns like vehicles, and stuff in the way, and handling materials, both manually, both with mechanical equipment. So yeah, the hazards in your working environment are very diverse and require a level of diligence to address each and every one of them to an appropriate degree. So I think one important thing here, and that speaks directly to this idea of informing workers of the hazards in their work, and feeding into this right to participate and the right to freeze unsafe work. Sorry, I know, Emily, I jumped back there, but what sorts of strategies do you currently use? And again, this is a safe space here. If you don't use anything to specifically document, hey, here's what the risks are, that's fine. We want to know the honest answers here. There's no shame, there's no embarrassment, as we've been talking about. This is opportunities to do some soul searching, do some reflection, and ultimately set yourself some intention to move forward with. So do you use something like a formal hazard registry? You've probably seen it, especially if you've taken any of our courses. Column 1, I'm going to recognize my hazards. Then I'm going to assess them. What are my controls, and are they working? Maybe it's something that you call out in procedures. Hey, potentially these little icons, triangle that says, hey, watch out for loud noises, for chemicals, for whatever is in our procedures. Do you speak to these in any verbal risks context during training? Hey, yes, I'm going to come back to here for a second. When you're working with this type of tool, be aware that there is a noise hazard here and that you need to wear hearing protection. Be mindful that when you're using an angle grinder, the proper ways to use it because of the potential risks to the wheels breaking or the inspection associated with these because the risks involved. But speaking to those hazards in the context of the work that's being done or the procedures or the training is also a valid method. Let me come back down here, but so again, this might depend on the size of your organization. This might depend on the resources you have to put together something, but you should be using some strategies. Nothing specifically, that's a fine answer, but you should be doing nothing specifically means that I would hope you're at the very least having conversations about and drawing attention to the hazards in some way, shape, or form when setting up people to do the work. Some of these more formal methods I would definitely recommend, especially if we think back to the idea of efficiently onboarding people and if I'm a supervisor and the employer, being able to demonstrate that I've taken steps to provide those workers the knowledge about the hazards in their work, the information and instruction to do their work safely. Because again, that's in this case, I'm putting on a hat as an employer. That's my responsibility to support that worker's right to know about those things. One thing I think is important to draw attention to very specifically, and because we're getting into some training requirements here that will speak to this. As we talked about, workers, new workers, young workers have concerns about, hey, am I going to get in trouble if I report something, if I tell them that I was hurt? And reinforce, set them up for success, draw attention to it however you can. Put it on the reporting form there. When you pull that open, that QR code, have it there in big bold letters. Remember that you cannot be penalized for reporting a hazard because you legally can't. The Act under Section 50 says the employer is not allowed to discipline or threaten to suspend or dismiss a worker, impose any penalty or intimidate or coerce a worker because the worker has followed the rules, acted in compliance with the Act, sought enforcement of the Act and the regulations here. So for example, reporting a hazard, or participated in the investigation or any proceeding in enforcement by the ministry. I think that's pretty powerful and something that needs to be reinforced. And this again is legal language here. I think there can be huge benefit and coming to the best practices here of framing things in plain language for workers. Okay, you know what? what does it actually look like? Hey, we're not going to threaten to change your hours or lay you off because you report a hazard. Make it real for them. Address the fear specifically, because this doesn't speak to that. This says, hey, they're not allowed to impose any penalty on a worker or intimidate or coerce a worker. There's a lot of abstract elements associated with that. Again, this comes back to that culture piece. If I, as a worker, just had, even though nobody's directly said anything to me that they're going to penalize me, well, why do I still feel that way? That still needs to be addressed in the interest of actually getting those inputs in the system. So some things to consider here in the interest of shifting that perspective. Catch people working safely, call out people working safely. Hey, you know what? Hey, you're new here and I saw that. Hey, great job there. I didn't see any concerns the way you started up that piece of equipment, the PPE you used, and positively reinforce these safety observations. Clearly include things like health and safety behaviors in any code of conduct that you have work. Hey, if there's certain franchise or organizational employee codes of conduct, whatever you frame those as, try to include some health and safety behaviors in there. Again, I've spoken to this before, this idea, and I included a screenshot here of these safety pledges. Set that expectation up, set that intent from the start, both on the worker side of things, on the supervisor end. Supervisor and employee, you're going to end up filling these things out a lot, but I promise you, it means something to the workers that you fill these out with. That sets a commitment to them as an individual worker, and it allows them to set their individual commitment that they can hold themselves accountable to as well. Like we've spoken to as well here, simple reporting methods. If you can set up a system where with that QR code or something to make it simple to get those inputs, even if it doesn't give you much information, if it prompts you to go get more from that worker, you at least still got that report as a starting point. And rather than not getting it and somebody, oh yeah, I forgot to report that. It's going to take me some time to fill it out. So for example, to that end here, this is an example from a pocketbook I've seen given to workers as well. Quick one pager. And these are meant to, hey, if I'm a worker, I carry this with me. If I see either, if I'm a supervisor, I might document a risky behavior as an observation, or I might report a hazard as a worker. Some classifying information here, whether that's critical or not, and did I do anything about it? I tear that off. I put that into some box that my supervisor has to receive these sorts of things. That's still better than not getting any form of report. And this is one that I found interesting and that I need to learn more about how effective this is. But this is an example where workplace I was working with, they give all their workers these coins. They're quite nice coins. They're metal, they're enamel, they're quite heavy. And the idea here is that what they say when they give this to the worker is that, hey, if you have any concern, this is essentially a hazard report, a reporting coin, or a work refusal coin. This is a stop coin. And the culture that they're trying to create is that if a worker has a concern, if they have a reason to believe danger to their health or safety, that they put their coin down. And they level set. Everyone in the organization understands the gravity of, hey, I'm putting my coin down. That means somebody's got a concern and we're stopping. No matter who puts their coin down, whether that's person who's there day one or person who's been there 30 years, the coin is down, we stop and we talk about it. I think that's pretty powerful. And I think that there can be benefit to that in depersonalizing it to some degree of, hey, it's me, Aiden, the newbie here, that's raising a concern and I might have some hesitancy to no, I've got a coin, you've got a coin, we've all got our coins. I was told that if I have a concern, I put this down and that we all respond the same way. I think that's pretty darn powerful and something that it makes that right to refuse live. It makes it real. There's nothing that tells you how you have to allow workers or give workers the means to exercise that right, just that you have to. And I think there's some creativity here that you can leverage and lean into to, again, create this culture or unique systems that, that people feel. And again, the idea with this, people feel part of the team. Like I said, I need more information on how effective this is, but I see the potential for something like this to be pretty darn powerful. I know I'm going right till the end here, and again, I want to provide the opportunities for questions, but a few other things just to reinforce some important things we've been seeing health and safety system-wise. The ministry is writing orders related to some basic health and safety awareness training. So I pulled some stats. This was the last initiative they did related to new and young workers. From about 1,100 workplace visits, there were some pretty substantial numbers of orders. So 400 orders, again, from May to August 2019. So this is a sample related to basic health and safety awareness training for workers. Health and safety awareness in 4 steps, 15, 20 minutes, awareness of of the IRS responsibilities like I've talked about. That's critical. If workers aren't getting at that, then that's some fundamental information. Again, just in the interest of working here as a worker in Ontario, that if they're not aware of, then that might speak to, hey, that embarrassment or that fear that they may feel. And another pieces as well here, 300 orders relate to materials handling. So just handling stuff unsafely in the workplace. 200 around maintenance of equipment, inadequate housekeeping, and machine guarding. So, in your environment, some things that your committee or your health and safety representatives should be looking into as part of their inspections. And important pieces here for young and new workers, seasonal temporary workers. You need to make sure that anybody you're signing on to work for a few months still fulfills these requirements and gets the basic awareness training that they need. It is free. You should be able to click on these links here. The link for worker health and safety awareness in 4 steps, supervisor health and safety awareness in 5 steps. You can request these PDF workbooks in other languages if that is a barrier for you by emailing this email here. And the important piece here is that this regulation is based around, hey, the expectation is workers to work in the province have to have a fundamental awareness and knowledge of the duties of workers, employers, supervisors, the role of the ministry, the role of the WSIB, common workplace hazards, and WHMIS and occupational illnesses. Again, to be able to feed these critical inputs into that internal responsibility system. It's setting these people up for success and to allow that system to operate successfully. If we don't do that, then there's no chance of it being able to. Again, WHMIS is a mandatory training requirement as well. We cannot forget that. Employers must ensure that workers are aware of all information related to the hazards associated with the chemicals they use, handle, and store, and ultimately are instructed. And this piece here, beyond the basic awareness of, hey, I know what those symbols mean, and if I see them, what does that tell me at a basic level? Workers need to be able to use the information and instruction they're given by their employer to protect their health and safety. They need to be shown, hey, here's how you're actually going to use this chemical that has these symbols. Here's, the requirements for using the PPE because the SDS says that you have to. Again, the idea of translating that knowledge and awareness into action is the core piece here of WHMIS, and one that we see. I see your question there, Amy, about more on the pre and post 2022 WHMIS program requirements. Some of the biggest changes were related to the expectations surrounding the hazardous products legislation. So again, more related to the expectations for the products coming into the country to be distributed to workplaces to use, to have this all appropriate hazard related information. That's some of the most major changes recently. But again, important soul searching question here is, how do you verify this? This is the expectation. How do you make sure in your workplace that workers are actually able to use the knowledge and training you give them with regards to the chemicals that they're using properly? And again, if that is related to PPE, it's not good enough just to do that training module and, hey, you completed that learning module. You need to be able to verify that. That's a critical piece of this legislation and one that's commonly missed. Again, I know we're close to time here, so I want to respect. I encourage you to keep up to date on our website here. This is probably one of the areas of our website that gets updated the most, because we know this is a huge concern to people. The risk associated with new, young, and vulnerable workers in the workplace. So I definitely recommend you keep up to speed or keep checking on this. And again, there's plenty of resources we have available to you here, and these should all be clickable links, so we can leave these up here for a moment. Orientation guides, competency assessments, our young worker resources, first job, safe job, checklists, awareness training. Again, we want to set you up for success, and all this stuff is out there for you to use. We want to set you in that right direction. And Amy, to your question there, if you have any more questions, please let me know. I hope that was hope that might have answered your question there. If you have more questions there, we can certainly go a little bit further. But I definitely encourage you to keep in contact with us. I know one of the things I wanted to obviously open the floor briefly for questions. And yeah, let's turn it. Dave, I'll stop talking here.
Yeah, it's okay, Aiden. Thank you very much. I want to come back to something here that you mentioned. I'm glad that you mentioned it. And I call it the fourth right, and that's protection against reprisal, or Section 50 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And just to kind of clarify, folks, so there's the act itself, which applies to all organizations within the province of Ontario. But there's also different regulations that support different parts of the act. So, Aiden, I forgot what my question was. If I just want to get back to reprisal. Can you kind of explain a little bit more about what reprisal is and why it's important for employers to share that information with the workers?
Yeah, it's a good point, because what is a reprisal? And like, because these are, again, like everything in the act, open to interpretation. You know, what I might interpret as a, for example, hey, I'm a worker, I report to my supervisor that, a concern that I have with the equipment I'm using. And suddenly I find myself, maybe I've been on day shift for 5 years. Suddenly I find myself, maybe I'm getting afternoons, maybe my shifts have been changed around. Well, okay, maybe I perceive that as a penalty. Hey, that only happened after I reported a hazard. Well, okay, that would directly be related to that. And could be viewed as a form of reprisal. It's important here that it's what the worker perceives as a penalty that's put upon them.
Yep.
Outward things here, hey, oh, don't tell me that sort of stuff, or we're gonna have to let you go. We can't be having that here. That's very clearly threats to discipline or suspend a worker. But it's more of these other pieces here that I think employers should speak to more about what could be perceived as a penalty. And if so, to be aware of that, because again, that if workers aren't, and if people are getting their shifts changed or penalized to whatever degree, then I understand that creates that fear, and really just reinforces that perspective, maybe just by not being aware that something like that is a form of reprisal under the act.
No, that's a good point. I want to bring Adam back onto the call. Just give him a couple of seconds here to get his camera on and microphone on. But
Yes, Dave.
There you are. Adam, I want to kind of talk to you a bit about and get your opinion. I know we talked about this in the past, and it's around housekeeping in shops or even in workplaces in general. One of the things that comes to mind when I think of housekeeping is slips, trips, and falls. And Adam, can you kind of elaborate a bit on your experience in the industry with respect to the importance of housekeeping and how like you want to keep hoses up and just a workplace clean to avoid slips, trips, and falls? Is this something that you talk about in the training that you provide?
Yeah, certainly. I think in a automotive setting, slips, trips, and falls are probably one of our biggest hazards. When you think about the average auto shop, just imagine walking through an auto shop. You have numerous things on the floor, and even the obvious things are you have air lines, electrical lines, and so forth strung across the floor. Those can become difficult in some shop settings where, especially, they have older airlines or older hoses, and maybe the color of the hose is blending in with the floor and so forth. So, we always try to make recommendations on, airlines as an example. If you're able to have a pull down airline versus an airline strung across the floor, it's great. If you do have to have airlines strung across the floor, we always recommend to use a high visibility colored airline, something with a neon yellow or neon green. The other thing, David, that tire shops need to be considerate of is, especially coming into the type of year we are or the type of season we're coming into right now, being wintertime, is we have the potential for having a lot of other slips, trips, and falls. Ice on the floor, water on the floor, snow on the floor. A lot of shop floors, they may have a bit of a texture to them, but when they get a buildup of water and debris on them, they become skating rinks essentially.
Yeah.
You also think about the tools that a technician is using, whether it's an impact gun, hand tools, ratchets, wrenches. A lot of the times these items are put onto the floor, right? I take a tire off the vehicle. I put the impact gun on the floor for a second so I can take the tire off. Where do I put the tire? I'm putting the tire on the floor right beside where I'm standing in a lot of cases. So slips, trips, and falls, I think, is something that, I always recommend shops look into. I always recommend they take some preventative actions because those are the things that we don't typically think about, right? Who's worried about an airline strung across the floor until somebody trips over that airline and, breaks an arm or breaks a leg?
Yeah, it's a good point. I want to kind of come back to something you mentioned as well, and that is the use of air tools. And with air tools, there's noise associated with it, but there's also vibration as well. And what are shops doing now, in your opinion, and from what you've seen out there, to kind of control that hazard of noise and vibration? Are they doing anything?
It's I would say it's a difficult thing to control. Some shops are converting over to electric guns at this point. Now, we're not totally sold on electric yet because there are some challenges with torque and so forth. Whether the batteries can hold the charge long enough to apply the same torque, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. One of the big things we recommend, consistently, and I will always recommend, is earplugs. You have to have some kind of hearing protection. Unfortunately, there's not really a way to muffle the noise and the decibels coming out of an air impact gun, so you have to do something to protect yourself. And we always recommend earplugs. And if your guys are not wanting to wear earplugs, just to show them some basic statistics over where hearing damage can occur, and then compare that to the decibels of a compressor, the decibels of an air gun. Most things that automotive shops are touching with pneumatics are above that safe threshold of decibel rating. So,
as you say that, it's interesting because, and we were actually talking about this with some hygienists earlier this week. There is an interplay between these two physical agents, their noise and vibration. So if I'm operating your example there, if I'm operating a pneumatic impact gun, that noise that's being created is affecting my hearing from one input, but the vibration transmitting up through my arms is also rattling those structures as well. So the impact is double.
Not double. I think the other thing you have to remember too when you're dealing with pneumatic guns like that is, in a lot of cases, you're able to move away from noise and sound. But when you're dealing with a pneumatic air gun, it's what, 2.5 feet away from your face, because that's the reach that you can achieve with your arm. So you don't have that ability of moving away from a noisy compressor or moving away from, a noisy air system. It's right there. So ear protection is got to be top of line with shops.
Yeah, and one more question before we sign off for today. I want to respect everyone's time. I want to kind of come back to something that we talked about earlier, and that's around temporary workers and young workers, and just I don't know, I forget the term that we used, Aidan, or that you used, and that was, I referred to taking shortcuts, and that's one of the causes of injuries. And find too that when young workers or temporary workers are coming in, sometimes they fall to social pressures of the more experienced workers. They want to try to fit in. That said, what can be done in the workplace? First, we'll start off with Aidan, and then Adam, I want to come to you with the same question. What can be done in the workplace to encourage the more experienced staff to work safely and sort of endorse or encourage a safe work culture for the new workers to avoid social pressures of cutting corners, I guess?
Yeah,
better expression.
We're speaking directly to that creating the culture that health and safety culture you want to see. And I put this slide back up there because the most powerful influence, and one that is most under the direct control, I would say, of the employer, would be the supervisor influence of putting the appropriate people in those positions to create that culture that they want to create. They are the day-to-day, this might be a representative of the employer fulfilling this role, but this supervisor influence cannot be understated, and whether that lends itself to the impact it can have on lowering risk and the impact it can have to raise risk can be its same. It really does depend on the direction that supervisor takes. And I think at that same time, then that can also translate to, hey, if the supervisor influence is strongly lowering the risk, then that in turn should be combating this to some degree, this coworker risk taking. Okay, we're all in the interest of, if everybody's being held accountable consistently, unbiased, fairly, then this, I would say, should diminish the coworker risk-taking behavior should start to diminish, because they're all being held accountable to the same standard there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
I usually hate this question, to be honest, because this is a really tough question. we see it a lot in the automotive sector. You've got what I would say the old guard, right? The older generation who really just wants to get in, get their job done, and the younger generation who they're not sure who they need to impress. One of the things that we always like to tell shops is, when you are hiring younger people, just make sure they understand the expectation. Make sure that they understand they don't have to keep up day one. Make sure they understand that this isn't a competition. It can be very difficult for a young person, and I can say this with experience because my son is entering the automotive sector, and I talk to him about this often. Is you don't know everything that the older guys know, and you're there to learn, and you're there to to be a good employee, but at the same time, remember that they may be taking shortcuts and doing things because they know how to do these jobs, or they know what they can and can't get away with. But I always remind him, and I would remind people on this call, is a lot of the older generation as well grew up in a time where the safety standards were very lax, and they weren't what they are today. And unfortunately, it comes down a lot of times to the health and safety departments in businesses and shops to make sure that they're reminding those staff members that, there is no grandfather period. There is no, getting away with things. We have to make sure that we're operating safe for everybody's sake, and remind some of those older staff members, maybe that don't have the patience that they need to have the patience, unfortunately. The world has changed, the work environment has changed, the health and safety requirements have changed. So they unfortunately or fortunately, they have to start conforming to the new norm and the new requirements that are out there. But the last thing I would say is just make sure you're constantly speaking with your young workers. Make sure you're reassuring that what they're doing is proper. If they have a question about why they have to do something in some manner, make sure you answer that question. Just let them know that their input is being valued. And it's tough though, right? The generational gap in the workplace does create some hurdles, and it does create some difficult scenarios.
One of the best pieces of advice I remember hearing as an individual who's doing a talk on the generational differences in the workplace. And yeah, to your point, I always like to remind that, the act in of itself is only 45 years old. It's squarely it's a Gen X piece of legislation there. It's not that old. And in the grand scheme, it was a talk I was listening to on and sorry, we're belaboring this here. On generational differences, and it was word mapping. He asked, give me a word to describe boomers, give me a word to describe Gen X and millennials, Gen Z. And it, the younger generations, the common theme that came up was entitlement. And I really appreciated the way that he flipped it on its head. And he's saying, yes, we we being the older generation created that. We encouraged question asking, we encouraged participation. We didn't encourage them to just, put your head down and listen and do what you're told just because that's the way you're told. That's the entitlement. You're entitled to answers. You're entitled to participate. I think that's pretty powerful to frame it that way. And so, yeah, talk to them, give them a chance to give you their input.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good points, gentlemen. And Aidan, I'm not sure if you make me feel younger or older when you said it's only 45 years old. It's
okay. I was delivering a session,
so I'm going to think about that one today. But
I was talking about the creation of the Act in Sault Ste. Marie one time, and a gentleman very kindly put up his hand and talking about, yes, it was the Elliott Lake miners who struck, and this was the impetus. And he said, very politely said, I was in that mine, and I walked out with those guys, and I said, I'm going to shut up. You tell me more. So no, this has been really good. I've really enjoyed speaking to these topics in some specific context here. So for anybody that's still with us here, I appreciate it. And please, I wanted to make sure if you have any ideas for what you could benefit on in future sessions like this, please feed those to Adam. Please feed those to us, and we'll keep a good thing going here.
Yeah, Aidan, thank you very much for presenting today. Appreciate it. Adam, thank you for joining us and being our guest. It's a pleasure talking to you both. And for you folks out there, thanks for joining us and taking time of your busy day. We're glad that you could be part of this, and we hope you got something out of it. Until next time, keep shining. Everyone's doing awesome. We're going to sign off now. Be safe out there.
Thanks, everybody.